Test 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So normally you should hear me now. Test 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Do you hear me?
Check here if.
Yeah. Normally you should hear us. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Check, check, check.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. How's my tie look?
Right? Because I'll get to come back here, right? Okay.
Right in the middle.
Or will I? I'll go up there. Okay. All right. Tell me when to start. Oh, sorry.
Oh,
Tell me when to start.
can you
Yep,
grab my
okay.
reading glasses really quickly? Yeah.
Well, good morning and good afternoon, depending upon where you're tuning in from. We have an online audience as well, many probably on the East Coast. Good afternoon. I'm Ian Lesser from GMF here in Brussels. A very warm welcome to you all, warm welcome to GMF, and to this conversation with Undersecretary of State for Economic Affairs, Jacob Helberg. Thanks to all of you for being with us. This is a very interesting time to be having this conversation. We have a wonderful group of people in the room. Let me also, if I may, just acknowledge some senior people who are with us. Ambassador Puzder, thank you very much. Ambassador Balkan, thank you very much for being with us, and many others who are here. We're very grateful to the US-EU mission and to the 3 missions here actually in Brussels for our long-standing partnership. GMF's mission, very simply, is to strengthen transatlantic cooperation. And as we're coming up on the 250th anniversary of the American Republic, it's also a very interesting time to reflect on something that I know is of huge interest to all of us in the room, but especially to our speaker today, the nexus of economics and national security. Undersecretary Helberg is a key figure on policy in this space, as we all know. He's also a thought leader, both inside and outside of government, if I can say, on the broader questions around economic competitiveness, technology, the challenge from China, and how to manage pressing issues like AI and critical materials, especially with the lies. Just a little roadmap to what we're going to do, because it's a fairly compressed event today. We'll have some initial remarks from Undersecretary Helberg. We'll have a bit of a conversation up here. We're going to take this away, actually, afterwards. And then we'll open it up to all of you. The conversation is on the record. Undersecretary Helberg, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here in Brussels. It's really great to be here. And I want to start somewhere personal. I was born in Europe. I grew up here and spent the first 18 years of my life on this continent, learning its language, absorbing its history, shaped by its people. Some of my family and closest friends are still here. My mother worked at the European Commission right here in Brussels. I remember the pride that she took in that work. Not just a professional pride, but something much larger. The sense that she was part of something truly historic. A project that had taken a continent scarred by 2 world wars and was genuinely trying to build something different that might make the catastrophes of the 20th century unrepeatable. Like many, she wanted to believe in that project, and she did. But for that project to survive, and for that project to thrive, it has to be willing to face certain hard realities that don't get easier the longer you wait to name them. So when I say some difficult things today, hear them not as criticism from the outside, but as concern from someone with a deep personal affection for this special place. Western Europe has not had meaningful economic growth in over a generation. The Draghi report laid it out in plain language. Europe largely missed the digital revolution of the 2010s. The platforms, the cloud infrastructure, the foundational AI models were built elsewhere, scaled elsewhere, and valued elsewhere. And now, as artificial intelligence reshapes every economy on Earth, Europe is accruing a lag that will not be reversible in years. It will take a generation to undo. That is not a policy disagreement, that is a civilizational emergency. And yet, there is a curious quietude around it, a resigned shrug, as though 0% growth in a world growing at over 3% is simply the European condition now, something to be managed, not fought. That indifference, that soft defeatism of perpetually lower expectations is the thing that worries me the most. not the stagnation, painful as it is, but the accommodation to it. Let me be specific about the choices that brought Europe here. The European Commission spent 2 decades systematically fining American technology companies, more than $25 billion. Europe celebrated this as regulatory sovereignty, but the reckoning never arrived. Those fines didn't cost American companies, they cost Europe. Every $1 billion in penalties broadcast the same signal to every investor and capital allocator on Earth. This continent is hostile to foreign investment, was the message. And so investment went elsewhere. Along with the ecosystems, the jobs, the spillover innovation that followed it. The fine was on American companies, but the price paid was on European workers. Then came the EU AI Act, a sweeping regulatory framework for an industry Europe doesn't yet even have. Whatever its intentions, it has functioned as a systemic guarantee that Europe will remain at a structural disadvantage in the most consequential technological race of our lifetimes. You can't regulate your way to greatness. You can, however, regulate your way out of it. The European Union began as a common market, a practical instrument to provide scale for European companies, lower barriers, and unlock a continental economy. A coal and steel community born of the rubble of war, built on the wisdom that shared markets create shared peace. But today, the coal is gone and the steel is gone. And in their place stands a Caligula's bureaucracy that has regulation by regulation arrogated more and more power away from sovereign European states, not liberating the European economy, but strangulating it. I say this not as an attack on the European project. I say it because the European project deserves better than what it has become. Ideas require honored stewardship, not institutional self-perpetuation. I want to push back on something. The notion that there is something intrinsically European about the policies that produce this stagnation. Some tout it as the, quote, European model. I reject that personally and historically. I grew up here and I saw what Europe is in its bones. Europe is Gutenberg and Da Vinci, the Venetian bankers and the engineers of the Industrial Revolution, the explorers, the scientists, the entrepreneurs who built empires from nothing. For 2,000 years, this civilization was restless, industrious, and unafraid of the new and the unknown. The sprawling welfare state that treats work as a chore, views success with suspicion, and extinguishes risk-taking is not European civilization. It's a post-war policy philosophy born of understandable exhaustion. But a temporary accommodation to exhaustion is not a permanent identity. As the Draghi report made clear, Europe needs deregulation, lower taxes, lower energy prices, and reindustrialization. A commitment to decarbonize at any cost that produces lethally high energy prices and hollows out European industry is not a green future, it's a managed decline with a clean conscience. Europe desperately needs these reforms, not because Washington demands it, but because the evidence demands it. Europe has every element of greatness. What it lacks is the policy environment to unleash it. That is a solvable problem and a choice. Years ago, my father was sick, and for a time he didn't want to face it. He held on to the very human wish that if you don't name something, it can't quite be real. I learned then that when you care for someone who's sick, you face a choice. You can join them in their denial, keep things comfortable, tell them everything will be fine. It feels like kindness, but it's really abandonment. Or you can be honest with them, even if it's hard. And even when they don't want to hear it, you can say, I care too much to pretend. You need to face this, and I'll fight this with you. That is what the United States is trying to say to Europe right now. Not in judgment, not in superiority, but in the honest, uncomfortable affection of an ally who refuses to look away. America wants a strong Europe as a strategic necessity and as a genuine personal hope. We do not want Europe on the periphery of the global economy or on the periphery of history. We want to work together on AI, on advanced manufacturing, on supply chain security. A strong Europe is a stronger West, and a stronger West is a more stable, more prosperous, more free world. But if Europe continues on its current trajectory, its share of global GDP will keep backsliding. By the end of the next decade, Europe's share of the global economy could recede to 10%, its lowest in 1,000 years, a level unseen since the Dark Ages. A great civilization diminished not by conquest, but by its own choices. The soft collusion of people who care for Europe too politely to tell the truth. We're not willing to be politely silent because we are not politely invested. When I walk these streets, I see a Europe that knows something is wrong. A continent and people that still yearn for the confidence and audacity that are their birthright. That Europe, the one that explored and invented and dared, is not gone. It's waiting, and waiting for leaders who will tell the truth, waiting for friends and honest enough to say, you're better than this, and we need you to be. The United States is that friend, complicated, sometimes imperfect, but totally committed to this alliance, to this relationship, and to an honest accounting of what it will take for Europe to reclaim its place at the center of history. Thank you. Thank you.
Undersecretary, thank you very much for those remarks. Obviously you're raising questions that are not new to the people in this room. Of course, there are more difficult issues behind that of how you change it. We've done some, if I may, just as a first question to you, playing off of what you were talking about. I mean, we've done a lot of work at GMF, but others have done as well, thinking about it. And it's not just in our conclusion anyway. Yes, there's a regulatory piece to this for sure. But it's not just about that. It's also about issues of risk culture and access to venture capital and just the ability to scale up things in a way that the United States does very well, but others don't do so easily. I mean, do you think, is that part of it as well, that risk culture piece? How do you change that?
I think the risk culture piece is obviously a part of it, but I also think when you live in a society where that frankly has disincentivized risk-taking for so long, you actually, the policies end up producing and rewarding the lack of risk. There's a very plain saying that you tax something that you want less of. And in Europe, there are taxes and regulations on almost everything. I mean, you can't go in a car in France without having a government regulation stipulating that kids under the age of 10 have to be on a booster seat, and the booster seat needs to correspond to the weight of your child. And frankly, I think at a high level, there's something very paternalistic about the impulse of thinking that the government needs to micromanage the lives of citizens. I think, frankly, when I listen to a lot of policy debates in Europe, politicians massively overcomplicate the problem. The problem is that Europe needs less regulation. It does not need a government-engineered solution to a problem that the government came up with in the first place. It needs less government regulation, it needs lower taxes, and it needs cheap energy. If you put in those building blocks, you will start to get the foreign investment needed for European founders, European builders to have the resources and capital that they need to build. And over time, that culture will rebuild from the ground up. But the wrong way of looking at it is assuming the government needs to engineer top down a culture of risk taking from the top. I don't believe that's how these things work. I think it really comes from the bottom up. And the best way to do that is to actually trust people by giving them more room to build on their own.
Let me also ask you about something that I know you've written a lot about and is very much in the debates on both sides of the Atlantic. This question of the nexus between economics and national security, and how do you see that especially in a transatlantic setting? Do we have different cultures about that as well? Do you think?
I actually don't think we necessarily do. I just think in the U.S. we have become very, very attuned to our overexposure to adversarial countries from a supply chain standpoint. And although it's taken a little bit longer for that same level of awareness to really be as widely appreciated in Europe as in the US, I actually think this is probably one of the areas where we see quite a lot of convergence between American policymakers and European policymakers, especially after the war in Ukraine. And the world as it stands today, with China's export controls on rare earth minerals, I do think that there's a lot of appetite to work together on economic security issues. On the issue, I think there's still a lot of work that needs to go into actually one of the features of the West is our companies are very geographically distributed because we have outsourced a lot of our supply chains, most of our supply chains. A lot of our companies take pride in saying that they're fabulous and just design companies. And that really stands in sharp contrast to China that has a very vertically integrated model. And so what that means is if we want to secure our supply chains, despite those supply chains being broken up between thousands of different vendors, there's a lot of education and discovery that needs to go into figuring out who do we rely on, what are the vendors that we actually need to identify and potentially substitute. And so that's an enormous amount of work. We've obviously been very invested in that work in the U.S., but I'm very glad to say that a lot of companies that our companies work with are European companies. The U.S. government for years has spent an enormous amount of effort promoting Ericsson as an alternative to Chinese 5G. And Ericsson is a European company. It's not an American company. We did it, because we believed it was genuinely important for national security. But we fundamentally did not have an economic interest at stake. A lot of our companies use German machinery providers because Germany is home to a lot of industrial machinery tools. And so there's a lot of pre-existing points of collaboration between companies on both of our continents. I think that opens terrain for expanded collaboration on supply chain security. And I'm very hopeful that those types of conversations will ultimately culminate in more European countries joining the Pax Silica initiative that we started at the State Department, designed to address supply chain security. And we're very excited to already include Greece and Sweden in that mix.
No, that's right. Actually, could you say a little bit more about that? Because I know it's of interest to many people in this room on Pax Silica. What's the next steps there with Europe?
So
how optimistic are you?
I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic. Look, I'm actually quite optimistic. I think the sort of primary, issue that has really consumes a lot of oxygen in our bilateral economic relationship is the DMA. We have a very multifaceted relationship between the U.S. and Europe, and unfortunately, the current state is the DMA is really consuming more and more aspects of that relationship, because our companies come to Washington every week, basically saying one of them's under investigation, the other one has a $500 million fine, the next one is afraid of getting a fine next year. And so that is really, the biggest point of friction. I really, really hope that we can actually find a sensible way of diffusing this issue, because if we do, I really believe it will be an unlock for our relationship that will actually remove 90% of the problems that we currently have. Our incredible ambassador, Andy Puzder, who's with us today, has done an outstanding job helping, be a translator between the American business community and his European interlocutors. And ultimately, I very much look forward to working with him as well as our European counterparts to make sure that we pursue productive lines of dialogue to actually have a fruitful culmination of those discussions.
I'm conscious of our time too, and I am going to come very shortly to all of you to open it up. But let me just ask you, you've written a lot, and obviously you're focusing a lot in policy terms now on the China challenge broadly. Maybe say a little bit more about that. I mean, this is a long-term challenge for the United States, for Europe, globally. What are the key strands there, and also how do you meet the challenge on the economic front without it becoming destabilizing strategically?
Well, look, my viewpoints on that systemic rivalry, as Europeans famously called it, are very well known. But I think China publishes 5-year plans that are available for everyone to read. And in those plans, they make no secret of their intention to basically dominate virtually every industry, certainly any industry that touches technology. And there was a great op-ed in the Financial Times, one of the rare moments you'll hear me tout op-eds in the Financial Times. And basically this reporter went around traveling around Beijing, and he was asking Chinese policymakers, as well as members of the Chinese business community, so if you achieve these goals, what do you see yourself buying from the rest of the world? What is it that you want to consume from the rest of the world? Because trade is necessarily an exchange. It's not just a transfer. And interestingly, he noted that he basically got a blank stare every time, because the answer is they don't want to buy anything from the rest of the world. They just want to export. It's really what the end of that road looks like. And so I think we have to really ask ourselves very serious questions about how, our own comfort level with allowing our companies to compete against a nation state that has a very comprehensive agenda to put our companies out of business and dominate industries. Our answer is, in the Trump administration, is we want to compete. At a political level, we obviously want a stable, productive conversation with the Chinese, and President Trump has a very good relationship with Xi Jinping. But at the same time, economically, they're a competitor, and our policy is to put America first. And so we really want to walk and chew gum at the same time, just like the way that China competes. America is very competitive too. And so we want to secure our supply chains. We think that is essential in order for our economic security and for our strategic leverage. And that's exactly what we're doing in the context of Pax Silica. So we're bringing together, we created a coalition of capabilities that brings together countries that have unique attributes and industrial aptitudes to actually work together to pool investment capital, to invest in infrastructure projects, to pool offtake agreements, and start to rebuild a new geography for our supply chain. If I could finish on one last point, you said, earlier, what are sort of the specific types of projects or efforts that Pax Silicon would pursue? Specifically, there's two broad lines of efforts. There are efforts on policy and efforts on projects. Efforts on policies include anti-dumping. They include developing baseline definitions for sensitive technology and critical infrastructure, as well as defining a pro-innovation agenda on AI. And then on projects, we want to focus on logistics infrastructure and mineral processing. Logistics, because if we want a competitive supply chain, we need to have the ability to move things around really quickly and competitively, which is really why China has built the Belt and Road Initiative. And mineral processing, because obviously right now, the global economy is facing a very acute situation with the bottlenecking of rare earth minerals.
Thank you very much. Time to open it up to all of you. Please do tell us who you are and where you're from. And maybe if I can go right. Gina, is that you? Thank you.
Thank you for taking our questions. Gina Smilik from the New York Times. You mentioned the DMA, and I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about what exactly the Trump administration is planning to do when it comes to the DMA. When you say that the goal is to diffuse that situation, what does diffusement look like in this case?
So the conversations around the DMA are currently a part of ongoing trade negotiations between the US and the EU. I'll leave it at that because obviously it wouldn't necessarily be productive to unpack, the content of negotiations that are still ongoing. But all I'll say is we haven't made a secret about our viewpoint that we view a lot of the penalties from the DMA as a non-tariff trade barrier, and therefore they're a part of bilateral trade negotiations.
Okay. Please, I think just in the second row here, if you can, and then I'll get back there as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Undersecretary Helberg, for your time this afternoon. Malte Lujan, I'm leading the American Chamber of Commerce to the EU, representing the business community here in Brussels. You said we can't be politely silent because we're not politely invested. I think that really hits the nail on the head. Outside of the US, Europe is by far the most important market for US businesses. 59% of our foreign income comes from here. So this is where, outside of the US, the profits are. A lot of the conversation in this town over the past year has been about how to move forward on the Turnberry Agreement that was negotiated last summer. The Turnberry Agreement, the joint statement between Europe and the United States on trade. And you touched on many areas that are explicitly or implicitly covered there, including the non-tariff barriers, including raw materials, including China, and so on. That has felt very fragile over the past months, and only recently the Parliament here took an important step to move forward on the implementation. I wonder if you can give us a sense from your vantage point how confident and positive things look from your perspective with this agreement, which is still the only basis, I guess, we have for moving forward compared to where we were perhaps 6 months ago.
I'm actually quite confident that we have been able to compartmentalize. As I mentioned earlier, our relationship is so comprehensive. I mean, we work and discuss so many different types of issues between the U.S. and Europe, and I think because of that comprehensiveness, we're also quite able to compartmentalize different issue sets. And on matters of trade. The trade negotiations are continuing and actually moving along quite well.
Okay. Just right there, please.
Thank you. Jacob Hanke from economic newspaper Handelsblatt. You mentioned the DMA and digital regulations. Do you hope to strike a deal in the coming days on this? And specifically, is there a way for the EU to meet kind of the US halfway without changing its digital regulations, and what would that entail? Is that about the gravity factor on like how high the fines are? Is that about which cases are opened? What exactly are you asking here? Is that this digital dialogue that the Commission is considering? And also, let me just ask you, because of your speech, would the US ever consider allowing the EU interfere in how it does its own laws? How you apply your own laws? Because it sounds like a very much like a one-way street on these things.
So, as far as I know, I don't think we have fined $25 billion, on European companies. But if we have, please do let me know, because I'm not aware of any such instance. So our European friends have been, when their economic issues are at stake, I assure you, we definitely hear it. So with respect to the DMA, there's really two lines of efforts. There are the DMA is, as I mentioned earlier, very much a part of ongoing trade negotiations, which are ongoing, and I really want to emphasize that those negotiations are going quite well, and we're very supportive and encouraged by that. And then I think on a going forward basis, our intention is certainly to actually expand a line of communication and dialogue with a regular cadence through our ambassador to Brussels, through our ambassador to the EU, Andy Pezder. And so I'm very, very optimistic that these two lines of effort will hopefully bear fruit in helping, start to address some of these concerns.
Okay. Yes, I think one were behind the other, right on this side, if we could, please.
Thank you. Kim McCrail from the Wall Street Journal. I have a question about, you focused again on the DMA, but I haven't heard you bring up the DSA today. And I'm wondering if you can explain, I think we've heard from the administration quite a bit about the Digital Services Act, about concerns over censorship, free speech. Is there a conscious decision here to focus in more on the DMA, and if so, why?
Mainly because the DMA has actually been the genesis of most of the fines imposed on American companies. To be clear, we have concerns about both. We have concerns about the DMA, the DSA, the EU AI Act, the corporate sustainability directives. We have concerns about all of these, and so but when we look at narrowly defined the directives that have really been the biggest source of what we view as unfair treatment of American companies and in the form of fines, most of them have come out of the DMA. And so that's the reason that I have been especially focused on that.
Okay, and I think just right in back.
Yes, thank you, Undersecretary. My name is Karel Arnaud from SIPS, from a think tank here in Brussels. Just one comment and a question. A comment on this economic difference between the EU and the US. I think this is overdone. Last year's economic figures, Europe had an economic growth of about 1.5, US 2.1. US is mostly revised downwards, Europe is revised upwards. US has a budget deficit of 7%, the EU of 3%. Public debt in the US is about 120%, Europe it's about 80%. Of course, if we have more deficit, we can have more growth. And there are so many other factors we can look at these differences, and I think, let's say, this has been explained in the past. But my question is, if Europe, if the United States is so much in favor of European unity, why is your vice president visiting so often Hungary, visiting Orban again next week, like he did 6 weeks ago? Why is the United States not more in favor of Ukraine? Why is the United States stopping the sanctions with Russia at the moment?
Okay, well, there is a lot to unpack there, but first of all, let me just say that it's a statistical fact that European growth has been basically anemic for almost my entire adult life. Unemployment in France has been above 7%, hovering around 10% for as long as I can remember. And, France happens to be the second largest economy in Europe. Second of all, Hungary is in Europe. So, it's not because our vice president visits a country that has a leader from a political party that you don't like, that all of a sudden you believe that that's anti-Europe. I hate to say, but a lot of Europeans share the concerns I've expressed, and that's why a lot of them are actually voting with their feet for political parties that actually want a more sovereign approach to their governance, because a lot of them feel, rightly or wrongly, that that the situation has gotten to a point where they now elect leaders who are devoid of any real power, because directive after directive, the European Commission has arrogated more power away from the capitals to Brussels. Now, I'm not, here to say, what the right balance of power is in Europe. That's really a decision for Europeans to decide. I'm just observing this as, someone who follows dynamics in Europe. And frankly, this is feedback that we get from a lot of our friends in Europe. And I say this as someone who actually has a lot of family in Europe too. I'll leave my comment at that.
Okay. Just right in the back by the wall. Thank you.
Clemens New from Nikkei Asia. My question is on China. Do you think that the EU focus on regulations has distracted it from the strategic challenges posed by China? And how can the US work with the EU on China? And what are the difficulties are you finding?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, I think actually one of the biggest areas of conversion is really on economic security. I think this is where you're really starting to see quite a lot of convergence. I do agree with you that I also worry sometimes that the issue of the DMA and overregulation is consuming too much of the transatlantic conversation. And actually, that's why I'm partly here trying to basically express that, saying that I would really like to try to see this issue get to a resolution, because I don't want it to start to consume more oxygen than it should. Part of the reason for that is because there are inevitable pressures at work. I mean, the level of fines against American companies have really been disproportionate for several years now, and we hear from those companies a lot. And it's not just the executive branch, the Congress hears from those companies a lot. And so, ultimately, we owe responses to them, where we represent them. And so it's very important for us to be able to find a good resolution, and that way we can actually spend more of our time focused on addressing our shared economic security priorities.
If I could just right in the front, please. Ambassador Balkan, please.
Thank you, Undersecretary. It's been very interesting and very timely. I will make use of this platform to unashamedly to further my
tell us all who you are.
I'm telling you.
I know.
To further my national message, because I am the permanent delegate of Turkey here to the European Union, a colleague of the ambassador. Okay. We, of course, from Ankara have been following Pax Silica very, very closely. And just like this conference, we think it's a very timely initiative, because right now, as we're with this geopolitical confrontation, geopolitical competition, obviously the supply chains that underpin artificial intelligence are becoming essential. And my country is working on this in its own capacity as much as it can. Now, of course, Turkey is a part of Europe. Turkey is a candidate country to the European Union. Turkey is a strong NATO ally. And we think we should be a part of all of these underpinnings of the supply chain together. When you look at connectivity, when we talk about connecting the West to Central Asia, to Caucasia, to the to the critical raw materials, et cetera, everything there, which is a big fashion right now, it's this connectivity, and we're all trying very hard to do that together. And Pax Silica will be definitely a part of this. And looking at Turkey, with its strong population, its geographic location in the midst of all this connectivity that we're talking about, with its R&D, with its manufacturing, with its young, very skilled talent pool, we think we have a lot to contribute to Pax Silica. And we look forward to working with the United States and the other partners that are in there on this endeavor. Just wanted to give that message and unashamedly use this platform.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Really appreciate that, and I'd love to talk more after this chat.
Exactly. I'm conscious of our time. If there's I have one of my own if there isn't another one, but, okay. Please, second row.
Thank you, good afternoon. My name is Antonella Sopranzetti, I work for ExxonMobil. You touched on energy a little bit, but of course it was more on digital, so I would like to add, and thanks a lot for your remarks that have resonated very well with me and with thinking of our company. I would like to add to your list of things and regulations that probably are making Europe not such attractive for investments for companies like ours. A couple that you didn't mention, but I know are very close to the heart of Ambassador Pusder and the work of the mission here. And these are the methane emissions regulation, the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. They are creating, of course, a lot of concerns for companies like ours. We do agree with the ambitions of those regulations and directives, but of course, the way they are implemented are practically unworkable. And so we very much look forward to the work of the US government to support our views on those. And we have been very appreciative of the work of the US mission on that. So maybe you want to elaborate a bit on those two pieces of regulations.
Yeah, so the core, so this is definitely another area where we really view this as a policy mistake. For us, as one of the earlier questions pointed out, we're very vocal about the DMA because it really directly and disproportionately affects American companies specifically. We don't agree with the Corporate Sustainability Directive. We think it's just a huge reporting requirement on the entire European economy. In a way that's going to be very, very onerous. And to me, the especially concerning thing about it is it's really born out of this obsession with decarbonizing at any cost, at a time when energy is extremely expensive in Europe. And it doesn't have to be that way. It could actually be a lot cheaper. And with different policy choices. The U.S. was energy dependent on the Middle East for 70 years, and then it decided to basically do things like fracking and, pursue. Our president issued now an executive order to expand nuclear, which will hopefully pave the way for the next generation of energy abundance in America. And so, as Secretary Burgum says, we really believe in energy addition, not transition. And so we share all of your concerns about the Corporate Sustainability Directive. I'm sure Andy Pusder has, spent a lot of time discussing that one. But so we're happy to have follow-up conversations on it as well. What I'd like to say just before we wrap, on the point, earlier of the comparison of macroeconomic numbers between the U.S. and Europe. Look, I think, one of the sort of simple, numbers that I found really striking is that when I grew up here in the late 90s, early 2000s, Europe's economy as a whole was actually a little bigger than America's, which at the time, was really seen as, because it was the early days of the euro. And so at the time, that was a big topic of conversation. Today, America's economy is 50% larger than Europe's, despite Europe having 100 million more people. And that has been fueled in large part because of the divergence in productivity. The fact that Europe wasn't able to extract as much economic growth out of the digital revolution. But the message that I really want people to take away from my comments is not, European policies are all wrong, and here I am coming from America trying to tell Europeans how to run their countries. It's that there actually are really simple things that could really unlock European growth and talent, and that Europe really does have all the ingredients and all the attributes of being incredibly successful. And when I talk to some of my friends, sometimes some people will sort of say in despair, oh, but you look at China's 1.4 billion people, how can we compete? Well, Taiwan is a tiny island, and they're growing insanely fast, and they're totally developed, I can tell you that. And South Korea is a tiny country, and they're growing very fast too. And so my point is that you really don't need to be a giant continent country to grow really quickly. You can actually have rapid economic growth no matter what size your country is, if you make the right policy decisions and if you unleash the talent of your people. And Europe is home to lots of really great universities, very, very talented, young entrepreneurs. And so a lot of them, we've benefited enormously from partnerships between our companies, but also in Silicon Valley, where I used to live in a prior life. There were lots of European engineers that came from all corners of Europe and Silicon Valley. And so, and all we want and believe is Europe can really reverse this trajectory in a historic way by adopting a different approach. And ultimately, we want to be partners in supporting that effort.
Undersecretary, thank you for being with us. Thank you for the remarks. Thank you for the very direct answers to the questions. Lots of interesting things. We look forward to being able to continue the conversation on another opportunity. Please join me in thanking him. And before I go, allow me just, again, thanks to Ambassador Fusder, to your colleagues, to the mission, to the 3 missions, U.S. missions here in Brussels, for a long-standing partnership. We're very, very grateful. Thank you for that. Thanks to my GMF colleagues, if you'll allow me as well, especially Louise and Jessica and Martin, who make all of this happen. So we're really, really grateful for that. Thanks to all of you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again at GMF soon. Thanks.